Greetings all, Ferrari Man 601 here. Breaking cover, amid no fanfare at all it must be said, on the Assetto Corsa mod Facebook community has been this, the 1995 Ferrari F50. I don't know the entire history of this mod. I don't know all of the names of all of the people who have been involved in it. However, I have managed to deduce that some of the guys who have had a hand in completing this are members of the ASR group. And of course, we all know and love ASR from some of their wonderful Formula 1 mods that they have given us, both past and present. However, this mod is not an official ASR release, despite having some ASR brain trust underneath the skin. And it just basically broke cover on a Facebook group without really any fanfare whatsoever, and I really haven't seen it too much on YouTube. So, here it is. What of it? Why are we talking about it? Well, those of you who know what you're looking at, you know what this car is. This car does not require any sort of introduction whatsoever. Those of you who perhaps are somewhat confused at the moment, well, this is the Ferrari F50. Let's talk about it. Why is the Ferrari F50 so important? Those of you who know Ferrari's history will remember the nomenclature of cars featuring an F prefix in their name. Beginning in 1987 with the F40, Ferrari started to produce a series of absolutely bonkers hypercars to commemorate every 10th anniversary of the company's founding, beginning in 1987 with the F40, 1987 going back to 1947, 40 years of Ferrari being in business, hence the name F40. Nearly 10 years later, in 1995, Ferrari launched this, the F50, the second car in that 10 anniversary hypercar series. At the time of the F50's release, it was, I don't want to say excoriated by the press, but it certainly was not well received universally by the press. Ferrari, according to the estimation of many people, many journalists at the time, had outdone themselves so much with the F40. That car was basically considered universally as the best road car ever, full stop. Not even when compared to the Porsche 959 at the time, and certainly when the McLaren F1 came out in 1994, nobody really thought that anything could ever supersede the F40, despite cars like the McLaren F1 being faster in a straight line, the Jaguar XJ220 being faster in a straight line. Nobody ever thought that anything could approach the significance and the sheer ferocity of the F40. Therefore, when Ferrari released the successor to the F40, the F50 in 1995, the press were less than kind to it. People criticized it, saying it's too prim, it's too proper, it's too polished, it lacks the viscerality, it lacks that ferocity that the F40 has, it lacks the sensation of attempted murder through every corner, and perhaps some of those journalists were correct in those initial assumptions. However, as we have seen automotive technology increase and develop through the now 20 years that have elapsed between this car's release and the present, the F50 has aged rather well. Think about it this way. The F40 in 1987, turbocharged, twin-turbo V8 engine. This car, 1995, it's got a V12 naturally aspirated. We'll get more into the specs a little bit later. And then something happens with automotive technology. Technology continues its inexorable march forward, and we start to see innovations in road cars such as semi-automatic gearbox, double clutch transmissions, electronic throttle control, things like this, electronic stability control. When Ferrari releases the Enzo in 2002, the F60, as it has also been known, don't confuse it with the 2009 Formula 1 car, it's got a paddle shift gearbox. This car's got a manual gearbox, as did the F40 before it. The Enzo has all sorts of traction control and stability control systems on it. And nowadays, with La Ferrari and then its track variants, the FXX-K and the FXX-K Evo, we've got active aerodynamics, we've got all sorts of different hybrid energy systems on board with different deploy settings that the driver can adjust, but the viscerality of being directly connected to the mechanical processes of a supercar have been lost in the present. And a lot of people, including myself, lament the passing of the direct connection between the driver and the physical mechanical operation of the car. The F50, therefore, is the last Ferrari hypercar that allows that one-to-one visceral connection between driver and automobile. Therefore, I contend that the F50 has aged extremely well, and it now represents perhaps the purest hypercar driving experience available. This car is right up there with the McLaren F1 in terms of being connected to the road, being connected to the car, being connected to what's happening under the bonnet and what's happening under the skin. The F50 specifications read a little something like this. The car was produced, of course, by Ferrari between 1995 and 1997. They built a total of 349 of them. Of course, they were all built in Maranello, Italy. It is a two-door sports car, as you can see. You can call it a berlinetta or a barchetta, depending on whether or not you have got that roof, which lifts off, installed. The powertrain layout is a rear mid-engine rear-wheel drive system. The engine is a 4.7-liter double overhead cam, 65-degree bank angle, naturally aspirated V12. It is the Tipo F130B. We'll talk a little bit more about that engine later. The gearbox is a 6-speed, shift-it-yourself manual. Clutch, stick, there it is. Wheelbase on the car is 2,580 millimeters or 101.6 inches. The length in total, 4,480 millimeters or 176.4 inches. The width is 1,986 millimeters or 78.2 inches. The height is 1,121 millimeters or 44.1 inches. And the curb weight, ready to go with all the fluids installed, 3,080 pounds or exactly 1,400 kilograms. It seems a little heavy. It seems a little big. Maybe those were some of the character flaws, using big air quotes there, that the mid-90s journalists were talking about when they did their initial evaluations on this car. However, this is an absolutely fantastic piece of road-going equipment. Let's talk a little bit more about why. This car has, as its engineering and overall mechanical layout inspiration, the 1990 Ferrari Formula One car, the 641, and of course the 640 before it in 1989. The 640 from 1989 is the car which took Alain Prost to his third world championship. Where are the connections between that Formula One car and this road car? Well, they are all over the place, they are numerous, and they are obvious. The most important connection between that race car and this road car, though, has to be the engine. We talked about this engine. It's that 4.7-liter double overhead cam V12. If you look at the Formula One car from 1989 and 1990, you'll see a very similar engine. Of course, it's a much lower displacement. The type of the engine in the Formula One car is the Tipo 036, which of course was a 3.5-liter V12. We have a higher displacement on this engine, but you look a little bit more deeply on the Formula One engine, and you see that it had 5 valves per cylinder. It had an absolutely ridiculous red line, had an absolutely ridiculous power output, and you find very similar figures on this V12. Of course, they have raised the displacement simply to bring the red line down a little bit to keep the car a bit more streetable and also to add a bit more torque into that power curve. However, you see this V12 has 5 valves per cylinder. It has its bank angle at 65 degrees. 5 valves per cylinder means that it has 60 valves in total. Just like the Formula One engine, it is naturally aspirated. It's got a variable length intake manifold. It's got individual butterflies over all 12 cylinders for your throttle actuation. The intake manifold is carbon fiber, and then it's got a nodular cast iron block. It's got aluminum heads and pistons, an aluminum oil sump, dry sump of course, titanium connecting rods, a forged steel crankshaft, and it's got magnesium oil and water pump casings and housings. So you've definitely got yourself a very advanced engine in here, fit with all of the materials that you would expect in a Formula One engine of the time. It's not an exaggeration by any stretch of the imagination to call this car a Formula One car for the road, because it certainly is. When we look at the car's running gear, we see that it has pushrod suspension, double wishbone pushrod suspension all around. And that rear suspension, guess where it's mounted to? The gearbox, just like it was in the 1989 and 1990 Formula One cars. Therefore, this is probably as near as we have ever come, at least until the AMG Project 1, which is coming out this year, to a real deal Formula One car for the road. That is the pedigree of the F50. The F40 couldn't even talk about that. Yes, a lot of technology sharing did happen between Formula One and the design of the F40, but this, down to the running gear, has one-to-one correspondence with a Formula One car of the era. That's why this car is so spectacular. Let's have a little bit of a closer look at what the F50 has to offer us here in Assetto Corsa. First of all, you can see that we have some pretty decent modeling work on here. The textures on this car are not quite as crisp as we would expect on the newer Kunos cars, nor are they as crisp as the cars that we've seen from some other modding groups out there. But given that this car has been released entirely for free, without any sort of fanfare whatsoever, it's certainly still within the realm of acceptability. So definitely good on ya to the guys who designed this thing. Looking around the front end, you can see the aero treatment that Ferrari went for on this car. It's somewhat reminiscent of the F40 in the sense that we do have these exhaust vents out the front end of the car, but those vents on the F40 were just these small NACA ducts, really, and they didn't do all that much. Here on the F50, they are much more exaggerated. They are much larger, and they feature fans down there in the center of those ducts. There would be fans on the real car. We don't really see them here, but not only do those ducts help to extract some air through the front end to cool the radiators, but they also create front end downforce. Notice you're not really seeing too much of a spoiler right down there on the air dam on the very front low side of the car. All that downforce on the front end being created by those aerodynamic ducts there. Very, very cool. Of course, this is a feature that we would later see in 2002 on the Enzo and on La Ferrari, and of course on the FXX-K and FXX-K Evo. We see this design going through yet another iteration, now featuring a pseudo S duct in the front end of the car. But here you can definitely see a design that you can trace all the way through the Enzo at very least, but all the way back in 1995. Very cool. Looking around the front section of the car, there are the Bridgestone Potenza Sport/track tires. Very, very nice. Magnesium wheels, of course, and carbon ceramic brake center locking wheel nuts there, just like you would get on a race car. Fantastic stuff. Great tire texture detail on the mod as well, guys. And you can even see the valve stem cover there on the tire. It is complete with a prancing horse. Very nice attention to detail. Looking across the midsection of the car, you can see this dark line that runs pretty much the entire length of the car. In fact, it does run the entire length of the car, separating the top side from the bottom side. This is a trait that we can trace really all the way back to the 308 GT cars from the mid-80s, and of course, when we did the review of the 288 GTO, we saw that. We see it on the F40, and we see it here on the F50. It's one of those styling cues that Ferrari carried for quite some time, and you can still, if you look hard enough, see some traces of it even all the way up to La Ferrari today. Very nice. I like it. It does sort of draw the eye to the top side of the car and to the bottom side of the car, and it also draws your gaze from the front to the rear, no matter what angle from which you are surveying this wonderful piece of art. Really like it. Looking across the midsection toward the rear, you can see these big ducts that integrate the bottom valance panel of the door, and then they feed radiators, probably oil coolers, in the rear there. Basically a big NACA duct feeding the radiator. Also, your engine air intake would be fed through there. Very nice. And then moving back rearward and topside, you can see a very big rear wing, very similar to what we see on the F40, but a bit more sculpted and a bit more streamlined. Of course, Ferrari had 10 years between the F40 and the F50 to learn more about road car aerodynamics. However, big wing still featured here on the F50. Looking at rears here is this big rear valance panel, which is semi-transparent, just a very fine meshwork as you can see, and you can definitely see into the engine bay where that gigantic V12 engine resides. Traditional Ferrari circular taillights and brake lights there with the reverse lights and turn signals integrated into those pods, I suppose you can call them, where the lights are mounted. Very nice. And then quad exhausts here at the back exiting through the rear valance. You can also see some tunnels underneath the car. This is a diffuser. It does generate some downforce, but it really doesn't start working until you've pretty much brought up some pretty significant speed on the car. So not so much downforce through the diffuser at normal speeds, but when the car hunkers down at higher speeds, you really do feel it. Looking across the top side of the rear bodywork here, nice integration with those body lines coming down from the roof through the rear window and then coming down to the tail end of the car, creating this tunnel that extends from the trailing edge of the roof down to this recessed area in the center of the engine cover. Very nice airflow, acceleration, and attachment going on here. And of course, you can definitely see the engine cover. Clear plexiglass. Definitely some heat dissipation going on there in addition to just looking really, really cool. Fantastic. Almost reminiscent of the Porsche 917. Very nice. Looking across the shadowed side of the car, great reflections as we have seen already in this paint finish. Fantastic stuff. Really fantastic. But you know what the most fantastic part about this car is, at least in showroom view? This. Yep, we can open the doors and we can open the engine cover, thereby allowing us a closer inspection of this 4.7 liter V12 engine. It is immaculately detailed in here in this engine compartment. There it is. There is basically Alain Prost's Formula One engine from 1989 and 1990. Yes, of course, it's got a different designation, it's got a higher displacement, but it's a thing of beauty. No turbochargers, it's naturally aspirated, it sounds tremendous, and it is producing thereabouts 520 horsepower at 8,000 RPM. Yes, this thing revs past 8,000 RPM. It's crazy. The red line is at 8,500 RPM. The fuel cutoff kicks in at 8,640 RPM. Tremendous. The specific power output on this engine is 109.1 horsepower per liter, giving us a power-to-weight ratio of 2.6 kilograms per horsepower. So no, it's not 1-to-1, but that is certainly a very significant specific power output figure. Tremendous. We've got a lot of data on this engine, so I might as well regale you with it. We're producing maximum torque of 347 pound-feet or 470 newton meters at 6,500 RPM, so max torque comes pretty high in the rev range as well. The bore and stroke on this engine is an 85 millimeter bore and a 69 millimeter stroke. That gives us a bore-to-stroke ratio of 1.23 to 1, which means that this engine is over square. The compression ratio is 11.3 to 1. The ECU is a Bosch Motronic system. It's the 2.0 spec on that, and it's electronically designating the fuel injection timing, the ignition timing, and it also actuates the variable length intake and exhaust systems. Fuel feed is a sequential electronic injection system. Electronic ignition as well. No distributor. It's all done with computers. As we mentioned before, the engine is dry sump. It's got scavenge pumps integrated with the final drive housing there off of the gearbox, and 3 scavenger pumps in the oil tank as well, helping to lubricate everything and keep everything cool. The variable intake, the intake trumpets on the top side of the engine below the intake plenum there. The butterfly valves are carbon, and the electronic controls for the engine, the ECU system, they almost close down the intake manifold at low RPM, basically to keep the idle speed under control, and then things open up proportionally as the RPM increases, and of course your commanded throttle actuation increases. Very, very cool. Variable exhaust system works similarly. Butterfly valves are in the upper tailpipes, so not in the primaries that you can see coming out of the engine block, but after the collector pipes come together, there are butterflies in the exhaust outlet pipes to improve that flow rate at higher RPM. Very, very cool. Fuel tank in the car. It is a racing style fuel bladder. It's made of rubber, it's foam filled, and of course all the fire protection material is in there. Had a maximum capacity of 105 liters or about 28 US gallons. Fuel economy on this car, being a road car, it got about 8 miles per gallon combined. That is both the city and highways, or 29 liters per 100 kilometers. So yeah, not exactly fuel efficient, but who cares? It's an F50. The transmission, as we mentioned, it's a 6-speed manual. Nice stick and clutch arrangement, limited slip differential out the back, and of course it only drives the rear wheels. It's got a dry clutch, a twin plate single clutch design. absolutely fantastic, and I'm absolutely in love with the fact that we have so many specs on this car because it is a road car and it is 20 years old. Everything you've ever wanted to know about the F50, it is now in the public domain. It is tremendous. Of course, this is only part of the story, though. We've got to go into the F50 and have a look inside. We'll close the doors here so we can get a better sense of our sightlines and overall proportions. You can see that it's very Spartan in here. I don't have any carpets. I don't have a radio. It looks like I might have air conditioning, but that's about it. No radio, no carpets. I don't even have electric windows. What gives, Ferrari? Of course, this is to maintain a good weight distribution and as low an overall weight as possible. So carbon fiber galore, carpets and radios and things like that, that just adds unnecessary burden to the car. So it's all been deleted and it's glorious. It is somewhat reminiscent of the interiors both of the 288 GTO and of the F40, particularly the F40, given that car was so stripped out as well. But there's absolutely nothing in here to distract you from the task at hand, which is driving this car and making it sound oh so wonderful as you're rolling up through that gearbox. Of course, you've got Ferrari's traditional gated shifter that we saw in almost all of their manual cars. Unfortunately, we have lost this design element in modern Ferraris. I would so love it if they would make a proper manual road car again. Unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to see that. Steering wheel, we've got a 3-spoke design, very simple, no airbag of course, just a horn control in the center and no other buttons or toggle switches anywhere on the steering wheel to distract you. You've got your traditional control stalks right and left for your indicators right and left, wiper control, things like that, and then some switches off to the driver's left mounted on the dashboard, probably for headlights and the front nose lift going over speed bumps. The instrument panel there, tachometer in the center, speedometer in the right-hand side, and then in the left you have a digital readout on things like oil pressure, oil temperature, water temperature, fuel level, things like that. Looking around the rest of the interior, there's your parking brake, there are your seatbelt releases, climate controls, and that's literally it. There's no glove box in this car, there's nothing. A little bit of storage between the seats, and really that's it. You didn't buy an F50 to go touring, you bought an F50 to go to the racetrack and have a grand old time, and that's exactly what this car will do. Nice detail here on the headliner. Of course, this is, you could call it a targa top, so this top would be removable, and then of course moving back to the windshield there, nice sun visor detail, nice hand-stitched leather it appears, and then the rear view mirror with this odd shape. Why is it shaped so strangely? I think it's basically to help the driver's sight lines, because think about it, if you look immediately behind you, you've got your headrest and then you've got this B-pillar. Basically, this is the structure of the roof. So if you had a rear view mirror that was symmetrically designed across this bottom surface, you'd basically be seeing half of your B-pillar all the time, and you don't need to see that. So it looks like they cut off that bottom left corner of the mirror. Very interesting indeed. Looking across the driver's door, there's your wing mirror, and then your door panel, your wind-up hand crank window, of course, and then a little pocket for storage. Carbon fiber door panel, of course. The entire car is a carbon monocoque, I should mention. So there it is, par for the course. Not much going on in the interior, but the only thing going on in this interior should be driving, and that is basically the only thing this car invites you to do. Very cool. We'll step outside once again. And I really like this. Have a look in the door jamb there. You can see a barcode put on there from the factory, and that of course would probably have the VIN number, vehicle identification number, and some part specifications from Ferrari put on there from the factory. Nice detail. And then of course the sealing surface of the door itself. You can see the latch mechanism in there. Very nice attention to detail, guys. We'll close the car up and take one last look at this absolutely tremendous 1995 Ferrari F50. Really, this is a car that should be native content in Assetto Corsa. I don't understand why Kunos have not given us the F50 nor the Enzo. They gave us the F40, which is fantastic, but what happened to the rest of this 10th anniversary series? We need the F50, we need the Enzo, we've got La Ferrari and we've got FXX-K. Come on, Kunos, give us the F50, please. However, this mod, as it is fantastic. It looks fantastic. It presents fantastically here in showroom view, But we've got to drive this thing, and that's where the real magic begins in the F50. Of course, we're going to take it to the racetrack that bears Enzo Ferrari's namesake, Imola. We'll see you at Imola in a moment. Welcome to Imola. Before we get out on track, of course, we're going to have a look at the setup screen and show you what's going on here on the Ferrari F50. Remember, this is a road car, so we won't have quite as many things to play with, but we still can learn a whole lot about how this car works from the setup screen. Here on the gear display, you can see first through sixth gear. We cannot adjust the gear ratios in the individual ratios nor the final drive, so what you get is what you've got. Tires, we have one tire compound. It is the street compound. The default tire pressures are 30 psi all around. Fuel, we've got it zeroed out to keep the engine quiet. Default fuel level is 30 liters. Maximum capacity here is 105 liters. We'll keep that quiet for the moment. Electronics, traction control off, and you can't turn it on. No traction control on this car. Alignment, camber, and toe on all four corners. You do have a little bit of wiggle room to play with this. And that concludes what's available here on the setup screen. Very simple. What you see is what you get. However, this car, of course, being a road car and being a very good one at that, has been well set up from the factory. So you really would not expect to have to play with this car very much at all. We'll get some fuel in the tank. Once again, the default fuel level is 30 liters, so we will run that. And now, in the cockpit with the car brought to life, you can see the gauge cluster has come up. We have, in the center of the gauge cluster, inside the tachometer, we have a digital gear readout, so we're in neutral right now. As you can see, it does give us gear position all the way up through the gearbox into 6th gear and even beyond into reverse. Very, very nice. Manual gearbox, of course. To the right of that, we have got a speedometer that is reading out in miles per hour. It tops out at 220 miles per hour. And I do not believe that it continues anywhere beyond that, but I can see a little bit of something beyond the 220 there on the speedometer. Not quite sure what that's all about. Maybe if you switch the instrument panel into metric, it reads to 3 something? I don't know. Anyway, I digress. Over to the left on the gauge cluster, you can see the same information that we saw in showroom view. I don't believe that that is actually active here in this mod, but you can see what looks to be oil temperature, oil pressure, water temperature, and fuel level. Aside from that, you can see the steering wheel here, that wonderful 3-spoke brushed aluminum design that we talked about in showroom view. There it is. And great visibility out the front with the windscreen, and then little side windows there just behind the A-pillars. Very, very cool. Other instrumentation that we've got here for our drive today, we have got the gear display and the pedal trace on the left-hand side of the screen, just so you can more easily see what gear I am in. We have got Imola to ourselves for the afternoon, so sit back, relax or not, and let's see what's going on here with the Ferrari F50. Out of the pit lane now. We're just going to be a little bit cautious. Bringing everything up to temperature, building oil pressure, oil temperature. Get a little bit of heat in the brakes. Remember, carbon ceramic brakes, they're not nearly as sensitive as they are on a race car, but still they do like to have a little bit of heat in them. We have road tires, so we're not particularly concerned about getting them into the upper regions of their temperature envelope, but a little bit of temperature never hurt anyone. Very, very good impressions initially here, just driving around at basically road-going speeds. And as you can hear behind us, that 4.7 liter V12 definitely makes its presence known at all times. I mean, we're turning 4,000 RPM at the moment. Remember, we have 8,600 RPM at our disposal, so roughly half of the rev range, as you can see, and it already sounds a treat. Yes. Let's give it a little bit more revs here up the hill. About 6,000. Variante Alta. And let's give it the beans. Coming down toward Rivazza. Third gear. Fourth. 7,500, 8,000 revs. Gotta jump on the brakes now. Get it slowed down in time for the Rivazza complex. Third gear should be fine here at lower speeds. And start finish, full revs, 8,000, 8,500, upshift, yes. Fifth gear, 250 clicks, 8,000 RPM. And into Tamburello. Rear end getting a little bit sideways there. Yes. So there's your first impression in this F50. What is it like? Well, the first thing that you notice once you wrap your head around the engine sound, it's just how flat the car is. I can detect very little body roll. This is a road car, remember. It weighs about 3,000 pounds, so it's not light by any means. However, just as we go into Piratella, just watch the horizon line as much as you can see of it. It's flat. It's like swampland flat. I don't detect any wallowing or wandering whatsoever. Aqua Minerale, same thing, flat. It is just dead stick the whole way. Look at that. At 110 miles an hour on the brakes. The brakes are nicely up to temperature now. They're working well. Little bit of power oversteer out of Variante Alta. This engine does not generate all that much torque. We mentioned in showroom view that they raised the displacement on this engine over its Formula 1 counterpart to try and gain a little bit more torque, and it does have more torque, but still not all that much. You can lay on the throttle here, and yes, you do get a little bit of power oversteer, a little bit of wheel spin, but not all that much. It doesn't just rev itself to pieces. You still have traction, even when you've got wheel spin. The torque is not that intense. Top end power, though, comes in really high in the rev range. About 7,500 RPM is really when this engine starts to come to life, and everything up to that, it's just a prelude. It's playing itself in overture, and then the crescendo comes at 8,000 revs when you get the full 520 horsepower. Dead flat, look at that. I don't know if I've driven a road car with less body roll than this. It's really remarkable. It's so stiff. You feel that stiffness through the steering. The steering weight is heavy. It really is. Of course, this car has no power steering. It has no power brakes either, as far as I'm aware in what I've researched about it. In that sense, it's very much like the F40. No power assists on that car either. And it really just allowed all of the information to filter into the pedals and into the steering unfiltered. It was tremendous. This car, very much in the same vein. Engine power, as I mentioned, it builds gradually up through the rev range until it really peaks at around 8,000 revs, which is only 500 or so revs away from the fuel cut there on the rev limiter. Really highly strung engine. It's got to rev high to be happy. But yet another example of its Formula 1 DNA, for sure. A little bit of squirreliness there under braking. This car has a bit of a rear bias in its weight distribution. Remember, big engine mounted in the middle toward the rear, gearbox right at the back, driving the rear wheels. Weight distribution is not quite 50-50. I think we have 41% of the weight shifted to the front at rest. So you can get a little bit of a pendulum effect in heavy braking zones. So just be mindful of that. Brakes themselves, they feel good. They're consistent. You can lock them up at higher speeds. Car does have downforce, but not that much downforce, so just be mindful of that. And in terms of the overall balance, yes, you do feel the car is a little bit rear biased in terms of that weight distribution, as we mentioned. You can get the tail out through the corners, as you can see there, and sometimes you get the tail out a little bit too much. But notice we didn't just go pirouetting out into the sunset. Half spin, and it figures itself out. Most of the time, you won't even get a half spin. Hard on the power here through Tosa. Let the back end hang out. Correct it with some opposite lock. Stay on the throttle, no problem. I mentioned that the steering feels heavy, and it certainly does. They've done a very good job emulating that lack of power steering. When you go over the bumps and you go over the curbs, you feel everything. The definition that you get in the force feedback on this car is magnificent. You look through the corners, as you see in most of my review pieces, you'll see that the force feedback trace is clipping a bit. I like it heavy, I just do. But this car definitely feels heavier than many. I've not adjusted my settings for this run at all. They're exactly the same as you see in pretty much all of my reviews. But I like that steering weight. It's very positive. It's difficult to juggle the car around through the corners. You have to be precise. You have to be committed. You have to know where you want to end up. .600 RPM, grab the next gear, watch 250 tick by, 300 meters, 280 or so, let's brake, downshift, Tamburello, that's sideways, let it come back the other way, balance it with the throttle. You can see there's no body roll, even when the car gets into those high stress situations with lots of rapid changes of direction. It's really planted. Again, double wishbone, push rod suspension on this car, just like a Formula One car. Get a very good sense of where all four wheels are at any given time. You know when the front has grip and when it doesn't. You know when you're getting a little bit of power oversteer building. You can feel that wheel spin starting on the rear axle, but it's never too abrupt. It's never too much to handle. Even with that, I knew that we were going to be in trouble early on. But you can see here, I just want to demonstrate, now that we've got an opportunity, I want to demonstrate how much torque we don't have. Let's do a hard launch, and I'm just going to gun it once we dump the clutch, and look at how much wheel spin you don't get. Yeah, you get wheel spin, but now it's gone. I didn't have to do anything with the throttle whatsoever. So you do have torque. You can break traction on the rear, but not as much as you'd think. And remember, with no traction control, no stability assist whatsoever on this thing, that is a very good characteristic. The car is generally very well balanced by default. Very nice, little bit of trail braking to get some weight transfer over the front axle, and then come off the brakes and feed in the throttle at the same time. Let a four-wheel drift get established. Really, it is very spectacular. The engine is very happy in the upper realms of the rev range. You don't need to grab sixth gear down the straight. Using all of the road and a little bit of the grass. this, so positive. One turn on the wheel is all you need to get yourself all the way around a corner. Trail braking there, get the back end out, get it stopped for the second corner, of course. Nice. Nice reverb here, up against the concrete barriers through the trees. Punish those curbs, let the back end slide, keep the power on, enjoy the exit launch. Yes, I'm getting carried away now. I figured it out. Now I can play with it. It just builds speed so quickly. We're doing 250 kilometers an hour, still accelerating hard. It feels entirely composed. No issues whatsoever getting the nose in. Even when the back end breaks free, it recovers easily enough. It doesn't have that snap oversteer at all, not at all like the F40 does. Maybe some of that on the F40 is due to the fact that that car is turbocharged and it has a lot of turbo lag. This car, of course, naturally aspirated. A bit more horsepower than the standard F40. Standard F40 sits at 478 from the factory. This one sits at 520 from the factory. It's just so nice. You can do whatever you want with it. Let's quiet it down some. Talk a little more sense. This car, it's amazing. It is absolutely amazing. When you remember how old it is, this is from 1995, remember, it's 2018. It's not new by any means, but I don't know. I mean, we've done extensive work in the F40, we've done extensive work in LaFerrari, we've done extensive work in the FXX-K, and they're all fantastic cars, the F40 in particular. And if you're really looking to see what's the fastest thing out there in the world today that a privateer can run on a track, it's got to be the FXX-K and the FXX-K Evo, and they're tremendous cars. They really are. The technology in them, there's really nothing that comes close. But this is in a different league. It's not as fast. It's not as technical, for sure. But it's got a manual gearbox. It's got a V12 that is pretty much directly taken from Alain Prost's Formula 1 car. It's analog. I don't have electronic aids. I don't have ABS. I don't have traction control. I've got none of that. I've got 3 pedals, a steering wheel, and a gear stick. And that's all. There's nothing to police me. There's nothing to rescue me if I get into trouble. There's no computer to determine whether or not my commanded upshift or downshift is actually going to happen. This is just raw. The car is under my sole dominion, and it rewards me through every corner with everything I do. It is just poised and planted. The body roll, that's the thing I can't get my mind around. Look at this. It stays flat, absolutely flat, even with ridiculous weight transfer like that. LaFerrari would be just wallowing around like an ocean liner. FXX-K as well. This thing, not a chance. Just boom, the horizon stays level. It's amazing. And then, of course, you've got the soundtrack. There is just something that is innately satisfying about driving a high-revving V12 engine with a manual gearbox and knowing that you are making all of this happen. You don't owe any of your success or failure to an electronic system. Everything is you and your inputs and your expectations and your ability to keep it all on the road. It's truly something that we've missed. And it's something that I really hope comes back someday. Again, like we said in Showroom View, we've got so many electronic systems now on cars, and they've made cars more reliable, and they've made them faster, and they've made them easier to live with. That is all true. But we're missing the sensory feast of something like this. Overcooked the braking a bit, that's okay. Play with the throttle, get on the power, let the back end come out, feel the rear axle hunting the tarmac for traction. Let the off-camber entrance of Piratella grab you and then get yourself in the center for the exit, come down the hill, brake, pop a downshift. Let the back end come around a little bit, the Rocco Minerale. Slow up for the second element, hard on the power coming up the hill, use all the exit curb. Grab a gear, wind it out, grab the next gear, wind it up as much as you can, jump on the brakes, sequential downshifts into third and second. Play with Variante Alta, get on the power as quickly as you dare, hang the back end out over the white line, over the AstroTurf on the exit. Fourth gear, now coming down the hill, feeling that acceleration, bounce off the rev limiter before you jump on the brakes, trying to correct the squirrely back end, because remember, all of your weight's back there for the most part. Trail brake, kiss the apex, get on the throttle, apply all the opposite lock in the world to keep it in a straight line on the exit of the second Rivazza, and before you know it, you're halfway down, start, finish, and beginning another lap. There is never a dull moment in this car. Never. It is truly spectacular. Look at that. Full opposite lock there. Oh, yes. This is what a car should be, folks. Those journalists back in the mid-90s, what were they thinking? Were they just not brave enough to drive this thing the way it needs to be driven? Were they too shocked that Ferrari would try to create a successor to the F40? Just what was it? Were they too impressed by the McLaren F1s of the world? I don't know. I don't really know why this car got such a bad reputation when it came out, but let me tell you, today, you'd be hard-pressed to show me something that I would want more. Even with our Koenigseggs and Aventadors and all kinds of stuff that's out there today. I don't know. I don't think, if given the option to have any hypercar ever, money is no object, I don't know if I could ever choose anything other than this. I mean, it's so badly unpolished in some regards. I've got no carpets, I've got no radio. The air conditioning, as far as I'm concerned, probably doesn't work. I don't have sat-nav, I don't have cruise control, I don't have Bluetooth or iPods. iPods didn't exist. Cell phones, as far as the everyday consumer was concerned, barely existed at this time. But who cares? I don't want any of that. I don't want your McLaren P1 with its active aerodynamics and its 55-stage traction control system. I don't want La Ferrari with its semi-automatic gearbox and its KERS and all kinds of... I don't care. I don't want any of it. This is what I want. This and only this. There's nothing in here to make me look like a hero except for myself. And if I look like a hero, then I can thank myself for it. And if I make a fool of myself, well, find somebody better. There is absolutely nothing about this that I am left wanting for. There's nothing in here that I would want to change. It's a V12, naturally aspirated, manual Ferrari. I'll tell you, it's gonna be hard to top this. In terms of road cars, this is still the most impressive thing I've ever seen. In terms of road cars in Assetto Corsa, is this mod the most polished mod that we've ever seen? No. Is it the most polished road car, even when we compare it to the native Kunos content that we've ever seen? No, it's not, but find me another one that drives like this. Find me another one that doesn't know what body roll is. The McLaren F1 GTR, it's similar vintage, but it just doesn't give me that sense of awe that this does. This is something else. This is something truly spectacular, and really, I think the world missed the point in the mid-90s when this thing came off the production line, because to me this is the definition of a Ferrari. This car should have been called La Ferrari, and La Ferrari should just be called the F70, because this is in a completely different league. If this looks like a little bit of a premature end to this review, well, it is, because it's not the end yet. I have mentioned so much during this review so far that this car derives itself quite a bit from the 1989 and 1990 Ferrari Formula One cars. Well, we're going to go and drive the Ferrari 641 from 1990, and we're going to compare it to the F50. We're going to do a race here at Imola, a couple of laps, nothing spectacular. Of course, you know that the Formula One car is going to win, but let's race it against the F50 and just see how much different there really is. We'll be back with the 641 in a moment. Welcome to the starting grid here at Imola. We have now got Alain Prost's 1990 Ferrari 641 Formula One car, and alongside us here on the grid is a white F50. This is the car that was the inspiration in total for the F50. The engine is derived from the engine in this car. The powertrain is derived from the powertrain in this car. The suspension is almost a one-to-one copy of the suspension layout in this car. Really, what you are looking at is Mark 1 and Mark 2 here on the grid. Really, it is something that we have only seen one other time in automotive history, and that, of course, is the Mercedes Project 1 that we'll see hopefully more of this year. But until that point, that F50 that you see there in the distance, that is the closest we've ever come to a Grand Prix car on the road. What we're doing here is not much of a race. It's just basically eye candy. It's car porn, if you want to call it that. This is the race car, and that is the road car, and they share a lot of commonality. We're just going to run with the F50 here, maybe outdrag it a little bit down the straights, and maybe throttle it through the corners a bit. But really, just look at the F50 as we're running along here and listen to the V12 soundtrack from both cars. On the grid here, we're getting the lights, bringing the revs in, and off we go. Up into 7th gear here in my Formula 1 car. The F50 will just be grabbing 5th before he goes into the braking zone. Nice spits of fire out of the tailpipes of the F50. We're going to try and get a bit closer here. Look at it. I mentioned when we were in the F50 that there wasn't much body roll. I can't see very much at this point either from this perspective. That's so planted, that F50 is. So responsive, it's handling the bump so nicely. It's always difficult to follow a road car in a race car because your own performance potential is so much higher than that of the road car, but it's great. I'm flat out here. I mean, I'm not in the rev range really, but, you know, flat out in 7th. The F50 is out-dragging us slightly. Of course, I'm not going fast enough really to get my downforce working, but it's great. Look at that. Pull up in formation here. He's just grabbed 5th gear. Give him the inside line. See his brake discs glowing there. He's got a little bit of understeer on turn in. Just look at that. Our eye level is right at that prancing horse logo on the back of the F50, looking straight into his engine bay. Spits of flame from the exhaust. It's fantastic. Look at that. Bye-bye. He's in the mirrors now. My own tires are a bit cold from running so slowly. But you can hear our V12 engine. Sounds quite reminiscent of what we just heard in the F50. Of course, our acceleration is much higher. We've got an extra gear. We've got semi-automatic actuation on those gears. We've got carbon brakes. We've got slick tires. We've got all of that stuff. But the common DNA between these two cars is readily apparent. The way this thing just reacts when you turn the wheel, the way it doesn't wallow about, it's very much in the same vein as the F50. It's very, very cool to see. We're going to keep our eyes fixed on those mirrors, looking for the F50 to come back. It's just so cool. There he is. He'll be braking in a moment. Give him the inside line and let him overtake if we can. There he is. Two V12 Ferraris sharing Imola. It's great, really is. No, there's no contest between the F50 and the Formula 1 car when it comes out to pure performance, but so great to see these two together. Let's get up alongside him. There's our straight line speed differential. Boom. That is a cool thing. That really is. We start our final lap here. All the way up to 270 kilometers an hour. He's flat out, I'm not, but still, that's pretty cool. And the fact that we can do this, the fact that we can take out the F50 and the 641 and really demonstrate that they do have commonality between them. We can't really do that anymore. This is a Formula 1 car, and that's a road car, but they have basically the same engines. They have basically the same running gear. Not even LaFerrari with its KER system. That doesn't really share all that many components with the SF15T or the SF70H. They're just too different of animals. This, well, I think anybody who's driven an F50 could jump into this car and not feel like they're in too foreign an environment. Watching that F50 take the curbing, it's great. We'll cross the line in formation as best we can. Very, very cool stuff indeed. Pretty tight formation at the end there, 58 thousandths of a second. Very, very cool. Of course, we got to look at what that seemed like from the outside. The engine sounds, they come together pretty nicely. They almost complement each other. Also, you could get a very good idea of just how small Formula 1 cars of the era were. The top of the snorkel on the Formula 1 car is still below the rear wing on the F50. Just lots and lots of coolness right there. I remember there was an old Top Gear episode that featured the F50 and the Ferrari 641. They had Tiff Needell driving the 641 and Jeremy Clarkson in the F50, and it was really, really cool to see both of those cars together. And, well, now in Assetto Corsa, we can do exactly the same thing. That F50, as you saw, it's really a great, great car, and I'm very happy that finally we have it in Assetto Corsa. There is a link to that mod in the description. I do hope you enjoy it because it really is something that's very enjoyable. And now, of course, you can hear the Formula 1 engine. I've let the car go on this lap, you can hear. But still, the fact that you can get a Formula 1 car and a road car, put them together, and you can definitely feel the shared DNA between them. It's something really spectacular. And Ferrari, they didn't get the praise they deserved at the time, but I hope they've gotten it now, because the F50 is just a truly tremendous car. And I'll say it right now, I don't think that even Ferrari have made something that has all of the components together in the same way that the F50 did. It's a V12, it's a manual, it's purely analog and purely raw. The Enzo is a fantastic car, La Ferrari is a fantastic car, and the FXX program has been an absolutely ridiculous program in terms of the technology it's given us, but it just doesn't have the soul. That has soul. And the F50, here it is. That has soul as well. Really great, great, great. As always, there are hot laps to follow here at Imola with the Ferrari F50 from both external and onboard replay angles. Please do stay tuned for that. Until next time, though, I would like to thank you all very, very much for watching. FerrariMan601 saying thank you very much for your continued support, your shares, your comments, your likes, and of course your subscriptions. Stay tuned for the hot laps, everyone. FerrariMan601 saying thanks, and we will see you soon.